5, 4,
3,
2,
1.
but who's counting, right? And his name is Major.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen,
please welcome Major Garrett.
From the nation's capital.
Major, fantastic.
It's The Takeout.
This is a major achievement.
With CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent,
Major Garrett, yes, CBS, yes, hi.
Major Garrett.
Major, that's nonsense, and you should know better.
Is Major out of the doghouse?
The answer is yes.
Welcome to the very best part of my broadcast week. This is The Takeout. I'm Major Garrett, and we are celebrating something we think is very special. What is that? Our 300th episode. 300 episodes of The Takeout. 6 years and running. Kind of an unfathomable number for us who created this show and still sustain it on a volunteer basis. Everyone attached to the show. Jamie Benson's right over there, Sarah Cook's there, Arden Farr is there, Eric Susanen, Ellie Watson, and others do this on a volunteer basis. And you know from listening and watching this show that there is one permanent truth I always let you know. I will never forget January 6, 2021. The show will never forget that day because our country needs to look at that day again and again and again to remind ourselves how it started, what its origins were, what it means, and how we fix the underlying causes that led to that atrocity in American history, January 6th, 2021. So that's why, for this 300th episode that we are celebrating, I could not be happier to have at the table here at the Dubliner, our host restaurant, Michael Fanone. He worked with the Metropolitan Police Department on that day. He self-deployed on that day. He held the line on that day. And he has written a new book called Hold the Line, published by Simon & Schuster, which I am obligated to mention, is a division of Paramount Global. Michael Fanone, it's great to have you with us. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and congratulations on 300 episodes.
I'm happy you're here for a couple of reasons. We don't know each other. We're going to get to know each other in this conversation. I hope we stay in touch with one another. Lots of other reporters have gotten to know you. But I'd like to ask you a real simple question, which is not a simple answer. How are you doing?
I guess if you're asking me in regards to my experience on January 6th, I've been fortunate. I've made a full recovery from the physical injuries that I experienced that day.
Can you remind my audience what those were?
Sure. I was diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. I also suffered a heart attack, as well as some bumps and bruises and a few burns as well.
2 burns on your neck, correct?
Yeah, I was struck with a taser on my neck several times, which resulted in the burns, and also I believe they feel attributed to the heart attack.
You write in the book, trauma is trauma, and it lasts a long time, and it takes lots of different forms. How are you coping with that?
I think I've come to terms with my experience that day, and I guess, there's new challenges that pop up all the time, and that comes from continuing to speak out. Mm-hmm. But all in all, I wouldn't have done it any other way, nor would I choose to do it differently.
For the audience, explain that day and how it played out for you and what you so dramatically represent in the book.
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, I began my career shortly after 9/11 with the United States Capitol Police. It's there that I learned that I loved the profession of law enforcement, but I knew that U.S. Capitol Police was not the agency for me. So after about a year, I lateraled to the Metropolitan Police Department, which is the traditional law enforcement agency here in Washington, D.C. Essentially, if you dial 911, we're the ones that respond. I spent almost 2 decades with the Metropolitan Police Department, and the majority of that time I spent in small, specialized units focused on narcotics trafficking, illegal firearms recovery, and also the apprehension of violent criminals. I was assigned to one of those units on January 6th, and that morning I fully intended on participating in an investigation that our office was working on collectively. My plan for that day was to do a controlled heroin buy from a location that had been problematic within our district. That morning, I remember receiving phone calls, mostly from my partner, Jimmy Albright, in which he was telling me about things that he was hearing from officers that were already at work. This was later on in the morning. There were officers from our department that had made arrests for individuals who were in possession of firearms at the Stop the Steal rally. Those individuals that we learned from the select committee were located just outside of the security perimeter, but nevertheless were there. They were armed, and several were arrested, and firearms were recovered. Later on, I learned that a large group of those individuals, mostly the individuals who had remained outside of the security perimeter, were headed towards the Capitol complex.
So I'm gathering, Michael Fanone, the tenor of these texts or calls was, this looks odd, and it's looking either odder or more dangerous as it is developing.
Yeah, I mean, listen, everyone in the department was aware of the Stop the Steal rally and the potential for violence. The rhetoric that had surrounded that event and that had been used by the former president and many of his allies in the weeks leading up to the event was, I think, seen as instigating violent
certainly
behavior
adding
on
an
that
air
day.
of volatility to that day, without
Absolutely.
a question. Yeah.
And so our department had taken some pretty significant steps in the weeks prior to January 6th, in that they had restricted leave for that week. They had canceled our days off. Our deployment shifts were changed to 12-hour shifts. We had activated a number of our civil disturbance units, and we had also taken an unprecedented step of canceling leave that had already been approved. So for all intents and purposes, it was a real all-hands-on-deck week. Not just the day, but the week. And I mean, it's a good thing that we did. I remember the phone call I got from Jimmy shortly after 1 p.m. in which he said, turn on your radio. The police perimeter outside the Capitol had been breached and that officers were being attacked. After that, listening to the distress calls come out from officers all over the Capitol complex, and then eventually the agency distress call coming from U.S. Capitol Police, I knew that I was not doing a heroin buy that day, and that's when I made the decision that I was going to respond to the Capitol.
No one ordered you?
No. But, I mean, it should be noted that, my experience that day is representational of hundreds of MPD officers who self-deployed to the Capitol. I mean, we heard the distress calls coming out from officers and from our colleagues that had been sent to the Capitol. And
you heard, as you write in the book, officers were in danger, or officers were under threat, or that lines had been flanked, and that this was getting out of control.
I mean, I think after the first perimeter was breached, it was out of control. The initial MPD contingents, the CDU platoons that responded to the Capitol, the officers that self-deployed, quickly realized that they were dramatically outnumbered and that these people were hell-bent on getting into the Capitol.
That is the voice of Michael Fanone. We need to take our first break. Segment 2, we will pick up on the story right there. I'm Major Garrett. This is The Takeout, episode 300. It's a big show.
The Metropolitan Police did something that it had never done in the history of the department, which is tactically retreat.
From CBS News, this is The Takeout with Major Garrett.
Hey Major, it's Corey Lewandowski. I want to say congratulations on 300 episodes of The Takeout. I've had some great free meals from you. Look to get so many more. All the best to you, my friend. Great job.
Welcome back to The Takeout, segment 2. Many thanks to the Dubliner. Our number one restaurant in terms of doing The Takeout. Maywa was the ancestral home of this show for those of us who've been with us from the beginning. Long outstripped by the Dubliner, and we thank the Dubliner for its hospitality always. Michael Fanone is our guest for what we're celebrating as episode 300. Pick up the story where you left it off, Michael.
Yeah, so
you get there.
Well, we hear that the perimeter had been breached. At one point, the Metropolitan Police did something that it had never done in the history of the department, which is tactically retreat from a held police position. About that time, I was arriving at the 1st District, my district station, and I went into my partner's office, and he was sitting at his desk, and he looked up at me and said, what are we going to do? I told him we were going to go. I put on a uniform, first time in probably about a decade, maybe a decade and a half, other than picture day, that I wore one. And
because in Vice you were plain clothes.
Correct.
Yeah. So you get on the uniform?
Get the uniform on, and Jimmy and I found a car and drove to the Capitol. Once we got there, I remember we parked the vehicle just south of the Longworth House Office building, and we made our way up South Capitol Street. And it was eerily quiet. This is an area that's typically busy with pedestrian traffic.
Mm-hmm.
There was no one there. Once we got to Independence Avenue, that's when we realized that, what was happening. The street was filled with police vehicles, and we could see where police lines were, barricades had been toppled, and there were hundreds of demonstrators inside those police lines, and they were, yelling and screaming and chanting, and some of them were dressed in, paramilitary style clothing and equipment. They were all holding political signs. MAGA flags, Trump 2020, things like that. And then we made our way to the southern entrance to the Capitol. It was at that point I remember Jimmy pointing out to me on the ramp that leads up to the entrance. It was just covered in blood splatter. And once we entered the building, we walked through the Hall of Columns and made our way to the crypt, which is the circular centermost area just beneath Statuary Hall in the rotunda. When we were there, that's when I remember hearing a distress call, or a 1033, coming out from the lower West Terrace tunnel. And Jimmy and I responded immediately to that area to assist. We walked down a set of stairs which leads out to that tunnel. The tunnel itself is pretty symbolic in nature. It's the hall or the tunnel that the president-elect walks out of onto the inaugural stage to take the oath of office. It's about 250 feet long, about as wide as maybe 4 or 5 adults standing shoulder to shoulder. And I remember coming down the stairs, the first person I saw was Sergeant Bill Bogner, who I had known throughout my career. This was an administrative guy. He had worked as an admin sergeant at the 1st District for a number of years and was currently assigned to our academy. This guy was a paper pusher, but he suited up and also self-deployed to the Capitol that day. Bill couldn't see anything. He had been sprayed in the face with bear spray. And I remember going up to him and telling him, hey, it's Mike, it's Fanone. And he stretched out his hand, I think thinking that we were part of some cavalry that was there to relieve them. But it was just the two of us.
Right.
We had this kind of surreal moment, and then we started heading into the tunnel.
And the tunnel leads out, as you said, and there was a crowd there trying to get in. And these officers in front of you are besieged. They're reeling in one level or another, physically or otherwise, from things sprayed in their eyes or things that they're being bludgeoned with.
Yeah, so to paint the scene, we walk through this set of double doors that leads out into the tunnel. And immediately I was overtaken by the CS gas and the chemical irritants that were still lingering in the air. I didn't bring a gas mask, and quite a few officers actually did not have gas masks that were there in the tunnel. And that is intense and overwhelming. It's difficult to breathe. It's difficult to see.
Disorienting? Yeah.
Very much so. So I remember doing a about face, walking back out through the double doors and kind of collecting myself and thinking about all the decisions that I had made in my life that led me to this horrible decision to come to the Capitol that day. And then I remember seeing Ray Mikhail. And Commander Ray Mikhail was the highest-ranking officer that was there at that time. He was in charge of our Investigative Services Bureau, and he had self-deployed to the Capitol. Watching him command this 40 or 50 officers that were there defending the tunnel was the most inspirational scene that I've ever experienced in my life. And I think for me, it was the moment that I made the decision that this is where I was going to stay and to fight. And so my partner and I went back out, followed Ray Kyle, and it was there that we fought alongside of about 40 other MPD officers and around a half dozen U.S. Capitol Police officers that were defending that tunnel. And what we were up against was pretty much every single individual that was out on the West Terrace, which you couldn't see from where we were at, was about 15 to 20,000 people. And this area had, because it was the only open entrance at that time into the Capitol, had become this funnel of violence. These individuals, rioters, they were using metal objects, aluminum baseball bats. They were using scaffolding and police barricades as battering rams.
Shields as battering rams.
Shields, commercial-grade fireworks, chemical irritants, everything from pepper spray to CS gas to bear spray. And I mean, it was intense. You could not slide a credit card between two individuals that were in that hallway. And these officers that were there had been there for well over 90 minutes, fighting nonstop. I remember, making my way through this group of officers and just seeing them fatigued, bleeding. I think under any normal circumstance, any one of those guys would have been, on their way to a hospital in an ambulance, but that wasn't an option. We were fighting for our lives.
Because there were no reserves. There was just that line. There was just that number in small dozens of officers plugging that hole, holding that line.
Exactly.
That's the voice of Michael Fanone. Ladies and gentlemen, when we come back for segment 3, you're going to hear, in Michael Fanone's own words, what happened next. It's in his book, Hold the Line. It's vividly described. It's something you need to hear. You're going to want to hear. I'm Major Garrett, segment 3 of The Takeout from the Doubler, coming up in just a minute.
At that point, I was being beaten from every direction.
From CBS News, this is The Takeout with Major Garrett.
Hi, Major. This is Tony Fauci here at the NIH. I want to take this opportunity to give you a hearty congratulations on 300 episodes of The Takeout. It's been a privilege and a pleasure for me to be part of that over the years, and I wish you many, many more.
I'm Major Garrett. Welcome back to The Takeout. So, Michael Fanone, you're self-deployed. You've described to the audience that moment. They need to know that as you got closer to the front, you saw the light of day, but were plunged into darkness.
Yeah, so I made my way to the front, and the fighting there was brutal.
You describe it in the book as medieval.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was, individuals in, like I said before, incredibly close proximity, using, fists, objects, and the weight of, our fellow officers, or in the case of the rioters, their fellow rioters, to try to overcome the opposition. And at one point, we started to gain significant ground, and we were able to repel those individuals out of the tunnel. And it was at that point that one of them, an individual named Albuquerque Head, who actually is up for sentencing tomorrow, pulled me off the line and dragged me out into the crowd.
And one thing I should know, we're recording this on October 26th, so when you hear Michael Fanone refer to tomorrow, that would be October 27th. And also worth noting, before you left 1st District Headquarters, you put on a body cam.
That's correct.
You had body cam on, and all of this that you are hearing him describe in vivid, step-by-step detail is verified by that body cam video.
Correct.
So you're pulled outside, and then what happens?
I remember hearing Albuquerque Head yell out, "I got one.
I got one.
I got one." And at that point, I was being beaten from every direction. I was beaten with fists, metal objects, and pulled further and further out into the crowd.
You write in the book that you at one point felt like you might be genuinely torn limb from limb.
Yeah,
I felt that kind of pressure in pulling in every direction.
There were individuals that were restraining me, grabbing my arms, pulling them in different directions. I was terrified that somebody would get a hold of my gun. Yeah, I was doing everything that I could to retain my firearm. I heard people chanting to get his gun, kill him with his gun. And at that point, I remember being struck multiple times with a taser at the back of my neck. That individual was identified. His name was Daniel Rodriguez. He's been charged. And I remember the excruciating pain, as well as, the fear that I would no longer be able to retain my weapon. Obviously, the purpose of using a taser is to incapacitate someone, and having it used multiple times, I was losing control.
Did you have a helmet on?
I did.
Okay, so that helped a little bit.
I'm pretty sure it saved my life.
Yeah.
And it was at that point when I was most in fear of losing control, that I was frantically searching for ways to survive. At one point, I remember thinking that I could use deadly force. There were individuals that clearly met that threshold that were trying to kill me. That being said, I quickly came to the conclusion that, even if I was able to draw my gun, most likely would have been stripped away from me before I even had an opportunity to use it. And if I did use it, there were dozens, hundreds of people in close proximity to me. Eventually, they would, use it against me or use similar force against me. So I went for option B, which was to try to reason with them. I remember screaming out that I have kids. I thought maybe I could appeal to somebody's humanity.
That's what you screamed, I have kids.
Yeah, I have kids. And it worked. There were some individuals in the crowd that assisted me and provided enough time for other officers to get to me.
You write in the book that some actually said to stop or to end the beating of you and then physically helped you get back toward a place of safety.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, it was, it wasn't like some moment where I yelled that out and everybody just stopped what they were doing.
Right.
But there were some people that did intervene on my behalf.
And heard that plea for humanity.
Yes. We're literally fighting with other rioters to protect me.
Mm-hmm. You write in the book about the anger you saw in their eyes, this ferocity. I'm asked all the time, where does that come from? How did we get to this place in our country where Americans could feel that level of anger and act on it as violently, as viciously against someone in law enforcement? I don't have an explanation. And I'm not asking you to give one, but I'm wondering if you have any commentary on that. You saw those eyes. I've not seen those eyes. I've only read about them.
I mean, I think that there's a lot of contributing factors that I experienced. Whether it was violent rhetoric coming from politicians and political leaders combined with lies, deception. I think the media played a part. I think that the way we consume our media is also problematic. But I think ultimately it just comes down to, Americans have become indifferent to the idea that, this is a diverse country and that, people who have different ideologies and political beliefs, views on everything from, everything you could imagine can peacefully coexist, and that's actually what makes this country great. I don't know how to get back to that, but I think that ultimately it's indifference that is going to be the downfall of America.
And you're living proof that this can manifest itself in very dangerous, very close to deadly ways. And it was deadly for some of your colleagues that day.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, there's been a lot made about, Officer Brian Sicknick and what the medical examiner's office has said. But there is absolutely no way that you can say that what he experienced on January 6th was not a contributing factor to him suffering a series of strokes. There are officers who took their own lives because of their experiences on January 6th. And I know that because I know my own personal struggles with what I experienced that day and what I experienced in the aftermath of January 6th.
You write in the book that thought crossed your mind more than once.
Yeah, I mean, my motivations for speaking out were pretty simple. I wanted acknowledgement for the people the officers that I fought alongside of. And when I had, my motivations mischaracterized especially by, my fellow officers. I mean, that was incredibly, that broke me. Couple that with politicians lying about what happened that day. And then, eventually me being demonized and attacked by, members of the alt-right. All of those things take a mental toll.
We're going to get to some of the attacks on you, some of the mischaracterizations in segment 4. Michael Fanone is our special guest. His book, Hold the Line. He's an eyewitness. It actually happened, ladies and gentlemen. Painful as that is for all of us, we must peer into this darkness. Michael Fanone is here to help us do that. I'm Major Garrett. Our thanks to the Dubliner. Back for segment 4 in just a second.
I mean, listen, I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I was a intense Fox News consumer.
From CBS News, this is The Takeout with Major Garrett.
This is Jabari Smith, Executive Director of the NFL Players Association, here at the National War College, and I want to congratulate Major Garrett and his entire team on the 300th episode of Takeout. Not only great journalism, but something that's sorely needed in our country today. Major, congratulations.
Welcome back to the Takeout. Again, our thanks to the Dubliner. Michael Fanone is our special guest, celebrating our 300th episode. It's a milestone for us. And I always tell our audience, Michael, on this topic, I wish I could set it aside. I wish I could say this never happened. But I can't do that because it did happen. It did happen. It's real. And Michael Fanone is a living exhibit of how difficult it is for that lived reality to be believed in certain quarters of this country. There are still people, you write about this in the book, Hold the Line, who want to tell themselves or have told themselves it never even happened. Or whatever happened was so much more innocent than it's been described, and that there's this attempt to make it more ferocious or deadly or violent than it actually was. You've lived this part of the story. Describe what that has been like for you. I'm not mischaracterizing it.
No, not at all. I mean, it's infuriating. I don't know how else to describe it. I mean, it makes my blood boil because I see it for what it is. I mean, you've got a Republican president who I believe there's clear and convincing evidence orchestrated an effort to defraud the American people by lying about the results of the 2020 election. And he continues to do so. And that rhetoric, that effort, combined with his allies and their interactions with groups like the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and Three Percenters, resulted in the violence.
All of whom who were there.
Absolutely. Resulted in the violence that occurred on January 6th.
No Antifa.
No Antifa.
And you heard that?
No, I know. I've heard. Trust me, I've heard it all. I've heard that I was Antifa. I've heard that I'm.
But your tattoos are some sort of mystical puzzle about something.
I'm a left-wing, hack. I mean, listen, I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I was a intense Fox News consumer. I mean, you could say what you want to say, but those are the things that are real.
We were talking about this before we went on. Describe, and we're going to get you some more coffee, Arden, when we can get some coffee for Michael. He deserves it. You are the demographic, in a way, caricature of a Trump supporter.
Yeah, no, I mean...
Check all those boxes for my audience.
I'm more Trump than Donald Trump. I mean, I drive a pickup truck. I listen to country music. I hunt. I fish. I spend, all of my free time in the out of doors.
Humble beginnings, blue-collar family.
Absolutely. And, I thought that combined with my prior support of the president and the fact that what happened to me is literally on video. I mean, you don't have to take my word for any of this. You can just watch the body-worn camera footage and the thousands of hours of CCTV footage. I thought that I could help people come to the conclusion that Donald Trump is exactly what he is, which is a dangerous exploiter of democracy, and ultimately doesn't represent any of us. He only represents his own self-interest, and also expose some of the other Republican leaders that only represent their own self-interest. I'm not here talking about policy. I'm not, arguing higher or lower taxes for the middle class. I'm literally just talking about one man's efforts to subvert democracy.
And you encountered the hostility to what you just said within your own police force. Officers ostracized you, began to talk about you behind your back because they still held this affinity or devotion to Trump and thought you were trying to tear him down or knock him down or criticize him or something. That's what I got from the book.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, law enforcement is a microcosm of society. And there were officers that I believe had a very different experience than me on January 6th. Many of them, for a variety of reasons, opted not to respond to the Capitol.
Didn't even go.
Correct. And I think that, listen, there's officers that absolutely disagreed or were angry with me for speaking out because they just simply didn't agree with what I was saying. They felt like what happened on January 6th was justified and that they were supportive of that effort. That being said, I don't believe that's the vast majority of police officers. I think that there were a whole host of reasons why people, turned their backs on me proverbially. Many of it was, a mischaracterization of my motivations for speaking out. People thought I was an attention seeker. I don't enjoy this at all. And I look forward to some resolution in my quest for accountability so that I can go back to enjoying a life of obscurity.
And for my audience's benefit, explain what your current employment status is and how it arrived at that place.
Well, currently I'm employed by as a contractor for CNN. I work there as a law enforcement analyst. I knew that I had to leave law enforcement almost immediately after my congressional testimony. I started to receive like a backlash from within the department, and I decided that I was not going to remain an officer. Despite being 5 years shy of receiving a full pension, but I did know that I was going to return to full duty because I was not going to seek a medical retirement, nor was I going to give anybody the pleasure of thinking that I was unable to continue to do the job. And so, I worked very hard. I came back to a limited duty status in September of last year. And then by November, I was returned to a full duty status. If you read the article in Rolling Stone, you know exactly how I resigned. I wrote a nice message on a paper napkin, turned it into my supervisor along with my gun and my badge, and called Don Lemon and told him I need a job.
So you resigned?
I resigned. Yes. I returned to full duty, resigned, and December 31st was my last day on the department, and I started January 1st with CNN.
That is the voice of Michael Fanone. His book, Hold the Line. For our radio audience, we need to say farewell. For those on CBS News Streaming and our podcast platforms, stay tuned for the Takeout Outtake Especial, where we will have some statistics that I think you will find fascinating about our 300 episodes. I'm Major Garrett. We'll see you next week.
Going back over my own words and my own interpretation of my experiences, it made me proud.
From CBS News, this is The Takeout with Major Garrett.
Welcome to your Takeout Outtake Especial. I'm Major Garrett. Dubliner is our host restaurant for our 300th episode, which is what we're celebrating this week. We're recording this October 26th. Michael Fanone, formerly of the Metropolitan Police Department, author of Hold the Line, is our guest. Before we get back to Michael, I want to tell you a little bit about what we've accomplished here in our 300 episodes. So this is one of the things I'm very proud of. On the show, we've had 85 declared Republicans, 83 declared Democrats. You notice the inherent balance in those numbers? That's by design. 65 journalists, 49 members of Congress, 33 subject matter experts, 24 senators, 18 authors, also proud of this, 8 professional comedians, that would not include me, 8 political activists, and 8 former White House officials. As you know, we do the threshold questions, so let me give you the top movie answers. When we ask, all-time favorite movie, the most mentioned, Godfather 1 or Godfather 2. Next, Star Wars, usually Star Wars 4, the original, the number 1. And 4, and there's a tie here, Field of Dreams, Gone with the Wind, Shawshank Redemption. We'll get to the other bits of trivia about the threshold questions momentarily. Michael, I want to ask you, when you think about political actors you have encountered since January 6th, because you advocated on behalf of recognition, not only for you, but everyone else who held the line on that day, summarize what that experience was like.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, Major, I never had the highest opinion of lawmakers or politicians.
Held them in minimum low regard, as they say.
Yeah. I mean, there were some people that the only person that, or the only people that I really encountered throughout this process, and there's no offense to the few politicians that I call friends, but the only ones that struck me as true statesmen were Nancy Pelosi and Liz Cheney. I don't agree with either one of their politics 100% of the time, but those were two people that I felt were similarly dedicated to their oath as I was, and as many of my coworkers over the years were as well.
You write in the book that Speaker Pelosi kept in touch with you.
She did.
In unexpected ways that were not ceremonial or part of a photo op or something.
No, I mean, text messages and 3 a.m. phone calls, which I think I attributed to the fact that she was out on the left coast and probably forgot about the time difference. But I answered nevertheless. She was a very sweet woman, and I, was very, very good to me and to my family. As was Miss Cheney and several other.
You write in the book about Eric Swalwell and Adam Kinzinger.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm closest with those two. We just get along, despite how they earn their living, which I disagree with tremendously. But most of the lawmakers that I met with fell into like the Kevin McCarthy category, which to me was just, absolute and utter indifference. Indifference to me, indifference to, what other officers experienced on January 6th. You know, we were a political inconvenience because he knew that, you know, that event was instigated by the leader of his party, and he knew that drawing attention to it was not politically advantageous. But that's to say, you know, I was also met with some pretty extreme indifference on behalf of Democratic lawmakers, city officials that I pursued, like Mayor Bowser and the city council. You know, they couldn't care less about what the officers experienced that day and what they went through, because it wasn't politically advantageous for them, being, you know, D.C. officials and their thoughts that that would not generate votes by supporting the police. And so overall, I go back to that word, indifference. And you know, I think that you know, we should demand a lot more from those that represent us. At least I do.
So I mentioned the 3 threshold questions. I'm going to give them to you. You can take them in whatever order you prefer. I think I know at least one of the answers, having read the book. If you're on a long flight or a long drive, in your case probably a long drive, out to go fishing or hunting, what kind of music are you going to be listening to, because you really dig it? All-time favorite movie and the most influential book in your life?
All right, well, music is easy. It's either going to be, well, right now I've got a Sturgill Simpson, Charlie Crockett, Whiskey Myers, Brent Cobb, and Tyler Childers are in steady rotation. So there's a country music theme there. Movie, piece of cake, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. That was one of the first Westerns I ever saw, and I've probably watched that movie start to finish 300 times in my life. Book. It might surprise you. I've not read many books in my life, being that I barely graduated from high school. But yeah, I'll tell you what. This isn't like a shameless plug, but reading my own book for the audiobook was a pretty emotional experience. First of all, it was hard. I remember thinking that, you know, oh, pay me a couple $1,000 to read my own book, piece of cake. No, that it was not. But going back over my own words and my own interpretation of my experiences, it made me proud. And to know that, you know, that was a legacy that I'm going to leave to my children, you know, made me incredibly proud. Because I think it's important for them and for all of us to recognize that, you know, this kind of fairy tale that violence is never the answer, I think is ridiculous. I think that we need to start teaching our children that some things are worth fighting for. And I certainly thought that my colleagues were worth fighting for on January 6th, and that democracy is worth fighting for, which is why I'm not going to stop talking until there's accountability for January 6th.
That is the voice of Michael Fanone. The book is Hold the Line, again, published by Simon & Schuster, a part of Paramount Global. I'm Major Garrett. Thanks for hanging out with us at your Takeout Outtake Especial. We shall see you next week.